Hi, everyone. Welcome to the session of Talking Tech, Women and Girls in ICT. I'm Ayesha, and I'm a senior at UC Berkeley, and I am so excited to talk tech with Radia Funna, a founder, theorist, and futurist. Radia Funna is a futurist and business coach leading transformation programs for clients in private and public sectors and coaching transformation through agility, innovation, impact, and regulation. Her recent work includes leading transformation through agility programs at Verizon Corporate Systems, Global Technology Solutions Department, and second head of innovation at the United Nations Secretariat, where she led the first launch of the innovation unit at the United Nations Office of Information and Communications Technology. On the other end of the call is me. I'm a cognitive science student who got into tech during college. I made this shift from law into technology when I learned about the endless possibilities and applications of coding. I took a gap year from college to become a better software engineer, and I'm currently about to enter the workforce after this semester. So as you can imagine, I am so excited to learn from Radia, and I hope you are too. Talking Tech is a series celebrating girls and women in tech around the world and taking place this year from Girls in ICT Day 2020 to Girls in ICT Day 2021. Girls in ICT Day is the fourth Thursday in April. Our objective is to create a global environment that empowers and encourages women and girls to pursue the growing field of information and communications technologies. Let me bring Radia in. First off, Radia, thank you so much for taking the time to meet with me and to share our interview with the rest of the world and other women in tech. I'm so excited to have you here.
I am very excited to be here. I'm excited to hang out with you today. I think it's going to be a lot of fun.
Let's dive right into it. So, how about telling me about how your path was for getting into technology? Were you always into tech, and how did that happen?
I have a completely untraditional path. I don't even know if there's such a thing as a traditional path, but let me start out with the diversity of my background. So, as diverse as my background is, I did not grow up in technology. Minus a short stint in, of all things, production and writing at the beginning of my career. I really started my career working in a couple of law firms in Washington, D.C. immediately after graduation. But the funny thing was, technology was very important very early on, even in those early days, because I was a coder, which it's kind of funny now because when you think of a code, you're always thinking of software code. At that time, we didn't think of any such thing, but I personally was a coder. What that meant in this huge law firm, one of the biggest law firms in the US, what it meant was I got boxes and boxes of documents, and I was put in a basement with the documents. And my job was to take these documents and convert them into online queries that the lawyers could then go into this database and query around the document. So I did law, of course, graduated from school in law. So I was supposed to then summarize these big documents into these queries. And it was like Google before Google.
Right.
They could just Google a word or Google a concept, and it should come up and lead them to the case and lead them to all the documents, all the backup documents, so that they can work on it without having to read everything that may not be as interesting. So from the law firms, I went into compliance. First, I was working in pharma and pharmaceutical sales. I worked with companies like Eli Lilly, like Pharmacy Upjohn, working with hundreds and hundreds of representatives. I actually had 800 sales representatives and regional, national sales managers. And my job was to develop and implement startup policy procedures, field training programs, and just travel around the country training them on what they can and cannot do legally. So what were the FDA regulations around Prozac was one of my drugs, for example. So what are the federal regulations around Prozac? FDA was one set of regulations, but you also had PDMA, the drug program controls for the federal government. So I worked in that space, in the compliance space. Then I went into the insurance space. I was actually recruited out of pharma. And at that point, I was developing and systematizing and leading the compliance function for this multi-billion-dollar program called Medicaid that the state of New Jersey, for the very first time, had awarded to a commercial organization. So this was a risk for them. They gave this contract over to Blue Cross Blue Shield. Now it's no big deal. Blue Cross Blue Shield has been doing it forever. But I'm very happy that I systematized it across Blue Cross Blue Shield, which up until that point only did commercial insurance. And I worked there for a few years, and then 9/11 came. And 9/11 changed everything. And that was my first significant career shift because I was one of the few leaders that were put in charge of executing a reduction in force as a result of 9/11. The company needed to get rid of a few hundred people. And it was a very upsetting time for the country. It was a very upsetting time for the company. It was an upsetting time for all of us. And it was a difficult place to be put in because I was the compliance function. So my job was to work with human resources and sit down and have these conversations with everyone about when you get laid off and you sign this document, what does it mean? What can you do? Can you sue? Can't you sue? So it was very, very difficult. And what I didn't know as I was going through this process that I thought was super difficult was that there was one little secret, and that was that I was on the list. I didn't realize I was on the list. So they made sure that I did my entire layoff job. And then when I was done, they were like, and you're gone too. So I ran off and I did something that actually made me feel good. So I went back to my first loves. I love to write. I love performance art. So I went off and I did that. And I spent the next year writing a novel on ancient Egypt, recording an album, which didn't go anywhere, and acting off Broadway. I was also teaching at Rutgers Shoestring Theater. It was a lot of fun, but then I had become a starving artist.
So how far into your career was it you decided to go back to the arts after working in law?
4 years after graduation. So it hadn't been a long time, but it felt like a lifetime, as you could
so
imagine.
Much in those like 4 years.
Yeah, I'd done a lot in 4 years and I was like, good, I will go do what I want. But I didn't do very well as a starving artist. So I was looking for part-time gigs. I was used to doing better financially. And in looking for part-time gigs, I was looking at a paper called Backstage. They still exist, but now they're online as well. And this paper was where I went to look for casting call. And Nike had actually put in an ad in Backstage for an entertainment marketer, which, by the way, I mean, it was this space that I had never been in. But I did like Nike because I ran track in college and I loved Nike shoes. They were my track shoe of choice. So I was like, Nike. So my reaction was apply to it. At this point, I had been away from corporate for about a year. So my head was kind of in a different space. I would apply to anything. I didn't care. So I was like, it was something to do. So I applied and I was shocked. They called me. And a few months later, I was running East Coast operations in the marketing department, in the brand marketing department at Nike. And so that kind of got me back into corporate. The job right after Nike, I was recruited out of Nike. The job right after Nike, that was when I got into technology. So this is now 2004. And I was at the Advertising Research Foundation, ARF for short. I was recruited by a hero of the advertising industry because at that time, the advertising industry's foundation was about to go under. And he was asked to come out of retirement and turn it around. And so he decided to recruit somebody in the ops space, but that was from a different side of it. He didn't want someone in foundation work. And that's how he and I got together. And I just loved what he was trying to do. So he convinced me to do it with him. And he put me in charge of the operations function for the entire organization. And at that time, that included the IT team. So that's how I got into technology, because I was suddenly in charge of the organization's IT challenges, computers, everything. And it was trial by fire. It just wasn't something I'd done before. And I spent a lot of time doing that, setting that up. And then the ARF was again under immense pressure to tighten the belt. So suddenly they couldn't afford me either.
No.
And the CEO who had recruited me sat me down and was like, we can't afford it. Can you take this significant pay cut here? And the thing is that I don't work in corporate not to get paid. So I was like, no, I really can't.
Yeah.
I can take it for acting, maybe writing, but certainly not this. So I was like, you know what I'll do? I will hire you a replacement who is younger and cheaper. I've already put everything together. I'll be their mentor. So I did all of that. I put together a program with a couple of universities in New York City so that they could have ongoing interns, things that make it a little easier for a foundation to keep doing their work without spending a lot of money. And then once I'd done that, I left and I went back to my Nike-ish world. I went to Calvin Klein This time I was in global marketing and I worked for the head of global marketing at Calvin Klein. Then I got recruited out of that again. And this led to my second significant career shift. So, never my idea, by the way. I'm never like, oh, you know what? I think I'm going to do this. No. So if someone shows up and they go, I think you can do this. And I'm like, really? Okay. So I'll try anything.
Yeah.
So I got recruited out of Calvin Klein by a company called Spencer Stewart. And that's a top global retained search firm. They place CEOs in the Fortune 1000. They work with high impact organizations like the UN. They place global leaders, even in states, some of the administrative officials that they would hire. And what they were looking for was someone in the space I came from, what they were calling the luxury space. People who understood what the next generation of talent would be. So I came to work with one of their top CEO recruiters. He at the time was recruiting CEOs for Colgate Palmolive, Liz Claiborne, Saks Fifth Avenue. So that space. And he just wanted somebody who understood the consumer space, but wasn't yet at the point of the CEOs, kind of knows what's below them, who are the VPs, who are the directors, who's kind of that next generation. Then it was his turn. He got recruited. So this time it wasn't my fault. He got recruited out of Spencer Stewart into a company called Heidrick and Struggles, which is one of Spencer Stewart's top competitors. And he had an interesting role that he took, and that was for him to take the CEO recruitment practice and the board recruitment practice and make them into one CEO and board practice, and then to lead that practice. And he asked me, having already quit for me, by the way, he asked me to join him, but then he went and told them I was joining him before I decided I was going to join him. So he put me in a position where if I said no, I would embarrass him or whatever it was. But anyway, I didn't say no. So we left together. We went to Heidrick and Struggles. And I was soon responsible for global operations across the CEO and board practice. Wow. And I took on a different space in addition to that. At that point, Heidrick and Struggles also had what I called a woman problem. And women were leaving because they weren't going past this invisible glass ceiling, but a glass ceiling is always invisible, right? They weren't going past this glass ceiling. They would grow to a certain point, but they were never the leading recruiters. And after a few women who were really talented left, I raised my hand and I said, I want to help with this problem, but I need to understand, why is it that we're not promoting women to this space where they can also lead practices? And the answer was really simple, because women did not ever bring in the multi-million-dollar searches. They just didn't. So why wouldn't I promote a man who can bring in much better searches and who can lead this firm into the future? So I decided at the time that I think women needed a girls' club, because men all had these boys' clubs. They went to squash together and they played golf together and they played tennis together and they did all this stuff. And what did we do together as women? Where were our leaders going to find the kinds of contacts that will give them those multi-million-dollar searches?
Exactly. It's all the connections you have, for sure.
Exactly. If you think about it, how many women were even allowed in those clubs 30 years ago, 40 years ago, 50 years ago? I mean, now you're showing up and it's all new. You're always playing catch up. So I asked, can I come up with a solution? And my solution was Fortune Most Powerful Women Summit. Fortune magazine goes through and they talk about the 500 most powerful women in the world every year. And they bring them together at a summit once a year. And they also bring them together in what they had called the Dinner With series. And I decided to create a strategic relationship with them and Heidrick and Struggles. And the goal of this was to select our most promising women leaders in the organization and make them a part of this organization summit, a part of what this organization was doing. I also convinced Fortune magazine, and they never do this, to do a cocktail hour before their Evening with series, where my star female leaders will talk to them about issues that were close to women's hearts, like the number of women in leadership on boards, the number of women in leadership who led countries. And we had amazing leaders like Angela Merkel, for example, or leaders like Indra Nooyi, CEO of Pepsi at the time, who can speak to some of their challenges and also be open to women leaders who are talking about how to bring in the next generation, how to benchmark, standardize, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And so that worked really, really well. And within, I would say, a year or so, one of our women leaders became one of the top board recruiters in the world. That was really, really, really cool. And then a few months after that, I was tapped by the CEO of Hydrick and Struggles to run the World Economic Forum relationship because he just liked the way all the strategic relationships I was running were working. So at that point, my daily work was split between managing projects to recruit CEO and board leaders for Fortune 500 companies with my boss. I was also running all the firm's top strategic relationships, everything above $500 million I was running. And then I became more and more interested in challenges that were faced by global leaders, especially as they pertain to, at that point, industry level disruption. And this actually led me to my first theory. And shortly after I wrote my first theory, I started the organizational firm that I now own and lead, Build and Blaze. I started that in 2012. And that was my third significant career shift. Likely at least my last for now. And and that's actually kind of what brought me to Build and Blaze. And then in 2016, something very interesting happened. I did something I'd never done at Build and Blaze. I seconded at the UN for a year because I made the decision that it was really important to be on the inside to help develop an innovation strategy and launch the first innovation unit in the Secretariat. And embedding at the UN was super, super interesting because it changed my point of view. I went from this Fortune 500 baby, always thinking about private sector organizations and what's the place for for-profit organizations, et cetera, to suddenly being exposed to the sustainable development goals and what is the space for humanity? What do these disruptions do to people? And in 2017, I developed my second major theory, which was the ex-human theory, a theory of coevolution, human and machine. And it was partly inspired by that perspective. So that's kind of where I am today in that space.
I want to backtrack a little bit because you mentioned how you founded Build and Blaze like it was nothing. You were like, oh, I did this massive thing. So I would love for you to just talk about like, how did you start that? Like, what is it about for everyone else who's here listening? I'd love to hear it.
I wasn't looking, and I find that happened to me a lot. I wasn't looking to start an organization. Hydrick and Struggles, they had a very bad leader at the time. I can say that now because they got rid of him, even though I did like him personally. But he wasn't a great leader for the organization at the time. And the organization was going through a lot of layoffs. There were all kinds of reduction in force, and it wasn't the most comfortable place. And at the time, they made a decision to lay off a significant number of people around the world. And part of that included what I was doing, some of the work that I was doing. And it was suggested that I become chief marketing officer at Hydrick and Struggles at the time. And I would have been the fourth chief marketing officer, and he had fired the first three over a course of a couple of years. So to me, that felt like a dead end role. Yeah. So I made the choice instead to just take a package and leave. And so I was laid off instead of becoming chief marketing officer. And when I left, I got recruited into an organization where I was working with, for example, a Forbes organization that was doing events around the world and things like that. And they also were struggling with leadership issues. And I started getting this feeling like, is it that hard to lead? Like I didn't like always being at the mercy of a leader who didn't seem to know what they were doing. So that was kind of when I started thinking, do I want to start my own company? And many, many years before, when I first came out of college, I had actually started a company to write resumes. Again, I did writing. So writing is kind of what I do. So I was writing resumes for people and coaching them on how they can look for careers. And I did it as a young person, and I targeted young people. I targeted people like myself who were all in our 20s, and I was working with people in their 20s as they were doing their career shifts and that sort of thing. So I decided, well, maybe I should bring that back up. I should do that again. But when I did it, and now I'm going to date myself, that was before monster.com. And monster.com is already very old. So you can imagine how old I am then. It was before the internet, at least the prevalence of the internet. It was before anybody looked for jobs like that. And so people did want to work with a one-on-one person to figure out how to look for a job, where to put their resumes, that sort of thing. And when I tried to do that again, it was just doesn't work because there are so many places where you can go and cobble together a resume, templatized even with Microsoft Word. It just didn't make sense. It wasn't a good space. So I was trying to figure out a good space, and I had a couple of organizations that said, "Why don't you just come and work with us?" And so I started Build and Blaze, in essence, just working with a couple of firms. And then I started wanting more. And looking at this disruptive, I had come up with this concept of disruptive organizational strategy. I started thinking, well, what does this disruption mean? Why are organizations getting so disrupted in the 21st century? And I started making the connection between that and technology. This was 2010, 2011. It was new, even though we were 10 years into the century, we were still in the 90s. We were still thinking like we were in the 90s. And so it was like, how do you start to create something where people understand what this disruption is coming from as you yourself are trying to understand it? And of course, I dealt with a lot of industry resistance. People were saying, this isn't a priority. Looking at my strategy from the point of view of 21st century technology is not a priority.
Isn't that bizarre to think of now?
Yes, exactly. And that's kind of how I started the organization, just working with people who were looking a little ahead, early adopters. Even though I wasn't a technology firm, I didn't think of myself as a technology firm because Build and Blaze was so much about organizational strategy from the point of view of 21st century technology. I needed early adopters in the beginning. And so it was a slow start from that perspective. And then I think things started to change probably around 2016, 2017, when I started going more into the innovation space.
Wow. How was that switching into working at the UN and all those new goals and everything? How were you able to introduce technology into there? What was it like when you joined? Was it new there too?
The UN was not what I expected. My father worked at the UN, and I had a very different view of the UN than when I got into the UN. But there were certain things that were still similar to what he was saying. Actually, the space was interesting because they were a little bit more open, only because at that point, they had a budget that they were going to lose if they didn't launch an innovation unit within a year. So I showed up and they had a lot of pressure to launch. Actually, it was the only reason I was there. I, I was there because they had pressure to launch. They hadn't been able to launch in a few years, and they needed to do this before they lost the funding. And so when I came in, I realized that one of the biggest issues they were having was that the people who they had in place were looking at the innovation unit the way you would look at an innovation unit at Google, for example, or at Twitter. They were looking at a place where you could come up with little apps and do things that were supposed to be cool and innovative and different. And I realized that was extremely difficult in a space where, not to say technology is not serious, but in a place where serious work was done. when people were looking at wars or refugee crises, and you said to them, hey, let's develop a really cool app and the app will show you, it's like, you can understand why people are like, later. at this point, I have something serious to do. So launching the unit for me came about with understanding what the stakeholders were looking for. And I think that's the case in anything you do. What are the stakeholders looking for? Why would there be an innovation unit? Why would it be useful? And frankly, why you? And I was working with the Office of Information and Communication Technology. And if you look at what they do, they are in short, they are the IT folks at the UN. So they're almost no different than the group that I was in charge of at the Advertising Research Foundation. They were running around preferring IT services. So when your computer breaks down, that's who you call. When there's something wrong with your software, that's who you call. So if you think about it, if that organization wants to go into the space of future technology and innovation, it should be a similar role, right? The space can be different, but the role, at least as far as I was concerned, had to be similar. You had to be useful from the perspective of, if I want to figure out what AI tech I should use in this, then I call you, right? Like that's how I was looking at it. And so what I did was I created a platform around that, a platform that took external, exponential, emergent technology and brought it into the organization to be utilized for free, very important. So I made it more like a training program. I identify ways in which you can utilize these technologies for the most important strategic initiatives, introduce the technology from the framing, the point of view of the strategic initiatives, and then create a free, easy way to utilize them. And that's what we led with. So within 3 months, we launched the unit.
Wow, I love that. And just made it, it's so many possibilities just from making access to these opportunities to happen. That's awesome. I loved hearing your whole story. There's so much that happened. Do you feel like most of your experiences happen from people reaching out to you like, hey, are you interested in this? Or did you ever look for something to find and then just stumble upon something else? Did it feel spontaneous? Because so many of us think of a 10-year plan, right? To think about what we want to do next. So how do you feel like your 10-year plan worked out actually?
Yeah, I think a 10-year plan, at least for me personally, that's never quite worked. I believe in planning. I'm a planner, but I think you plan and then you flex. So you plan almost to get, in my mind, a direction, like what direction would I go in? But then you flex around that direction. So you can't plan and say it must happen the way I said or else I failed. Then you are a prisoner of your own plan.
I need that reminder on my wall.
Because you're in charge, right? It's your plan, it's your idea. And one of the most important things to remember is you're changing as well. So the old you can't keep the new you from achieving the new you's best potential because the old you couldn't have imagined it. I, of course, when I came out of school, I was nowhere near any of this. And I feel like a lot of my career moves, a lot of the reasons why it's taken kind of this weird path is I think it's two things. One, it's disappointments, right? Not getting what I had planned for, losing things that I had worked hard to get. And then the second is I got recruited a lot where other people saw things that I didn't see. Other people thought I could be useful in spaces where I wouldn't have even thought to go.
Wow, I love that. So throughout your whole journey, what were your biggest lessons or takeaway from everything?
It kind of aligns with what I just said. I think there's immense value in not getting what you want. I think that's probably the biggest takeaway for me. I've learned that perhaps the greatest lessons you will ever learn or the most amazing opportunities you will ever get in your career and frankly in your life are as a result of failure or disappointment. I think you learn a whole lot more when you fail than when you succeed. Because I think when you succeed, you're too busy going, yeah, I did it. But when you fail, you're like, what happened? At least you should be asking, what happened? And I think a lot of times when we fail, we look to others. That person stopped me or that situation prevented me. I look at failure from the inside out. I always try to find where I can blame myself, not in a negative way, but if it's my fault, then I have the power to change it. If it's somebody else's fault, then I am powerless. And I can't put myself in a position where I am lacking that power. So it's okay if, like me, you thought you were going to be a doctor. And I started out as a baby thinking I wanted to be a pediatrician, but somehow you find yourself in law. Or also, like me, you thought you were going to be this quadruple threat writer, actress, singer, dancer, and you dislocate your kneecap when you're 19, and years later, you find yourself in innovation. And it's like, what happened? Is it a good thing? Is it a bad thing? I think it kind of depends on your situation, but I think the most important metric, if you're trying to figure out the metric as you're looking at what's important to you is, are you learning? Are you growing? Are you better for this change or are you worse off? I mean, I think I'm better for what I did not get to have, because I think what I got to have is much better than I would have ever imagined, and I would have never gone down this direction.
Yeah, definitely. Thank you so much for that. I have another question. So obviously we're in the midst of pandemic and I'm a graduating senior and a lot of my friends, we're all facing this issue of unemployment. So during your whole journey, were you ever in a situation where you were unemployed and wondering what to do next? How did you motivate yourself to fill that time and figure out what your next step should be?
This is not as bad as 2008, but 2008 was a time when it just felt like the entire financial sector was collapsing. And around that time, shortly thereafter, was when I was laid off by Heidrick and Struggles. So I found myself thrown into that that world of there are no jobs. and
Yeah.
and I think part of the reason I've even stayed in the corporate world long enough to do what I'm doing now is because in my entire career it wasn't that difficult for me to find jobs. But for the first time it was. All of a sudden it was like, oh, I'm trying a little harder than I like to try to look for a job. There's nothing. It just felt like there was nothing. And I think for me, motivating yourself, I think it's a very good question actually. Motivating yourself, I think, is looking on the inside. So for me, it was always, if I can't find a job, have I done everything that I can do, not just to look for a job, but to be the best I can be at that point in time. Not just the best potential employee, but the best person. If I find myself with extra time, right? If I have extra time on my hands, I always realize there's something that I should have been doing that I didn't have time to do. And
Definitely.
so, I mean, looking for a job is a full-time job. So you usually don't find that you have extra time on your hands. But as an example, if you're looking for a job and there is a certificate that you would need that would better your chances, instead of just looking and saying, this is available, you go, okay, this is what I didn't get a call back for. But here are the things that they wanted. And how much of it did I have? And how much of it didn't I have? And how much of it am I interested in having? And how much of it am I not interested in having? And depending on what you're interested in, maybe it's an opportunity to go get that certificate. And I think these days it's really interesting because you have organizations where you can do that for free, right? So it's not like, well, I have no salary, so how am I going to get better educated? There are organizations that allow you to do that for free. Sometimes universities will give you a free course in something that could be helpful to get you to that next level. So I don't want to say keep busy because it sounds like I'm making it up, but I feel like instead of getting depressed and down, I instead try to look for ways in which I can better myself, whether or not I can go in the direction that I had in mind.
Thank you so much for sharing. I feel like that's so relevant for so many of us right now going through that. But thank you so much for that advice. So moving back on to today and what it's like, you want to share like what your job in tech is like now? Like what's your day-to-day like?
So my job now, I am a futurist. I am a business coach. I primarily work in the US and in global forums like the United Nations and World Economic Forum. And I mean, a lot of people say, well, how does one become a futurist? Or how does one become a business coach? I'm not even sure I know the answer to that. I just know that I spend a lot of my time looking at future scenarios. And it's why people call me a futurist. For the last 8 years, though, I have led Build and Blaze, my organization's technology and transformation projects. I've worked with public and private clients like Verizon, for example. And in addition, some of my work like a theorist or particularly my theory on human machine coevolution, I spend a lot of time in that space from a tech perspective. My day to day can be summed up in one sentence, which is no 2 days are alike. So I don't necessarily have what one would call a day to day. But if I were to give an example, if I'm at a client site, like let's say I'm at Basking Ridge, New Jersey with Verizon. And when I go to the Verizon, for example, Tuesdays tend to be my meeting days. So I go in there, I like to arrive very early. I don't like traffic. So I leave here at about 6 a.m. I get there at about 7 a.m. And then I eat breakfast as I read my emails. And then I do my meetings. I usually start at about 7:30 a.m. And I do back-to-back meetings through to about 6:30, maybe 7 p.m. And somewhere in the middle there, noonish, one-ish, two-ish, I grab lunch. And then usually I leave again after the traffic because I don't like traffic. So I get in before the traffic and I leave after the traffic. That's kind of a normal-ish meeting day at Verizon. But then on the other side, if I'm working on a research project or I'm working on a theory, I may just immerse myself in the topic and have these 12 to 14-hour days of reading or listening or writing with little interruption. So that's kind of what my day-to-day can look like. I guess the two extremes.
What are your favorite parts about your job and your day-to-day activities?
What I love about my job is it's a constant challenge. I love challenges. I love to be able to overcome things. It's just never boring. But I also love working in the tech space. And I think what attracts me to technology is this concept of possibility. That's my favorite thing is possibility. The development of technology has been a path to human transformation since the time of ancient humans. And I also like that technology, the definition of technology changes depending on the era we live in. So one of our earliest technologies is not even thought of as a technology now, which is fire. If you look at fire, for example, it revolutionized the evolution of humanity. Safety from animals, if you think about it, right? It made it possible to migrate to colder climates. But by far, one thing we don't ever think about is the greatest benefit of fire, which is that it allowed us to cook our food. It increased our caloric intake because we could outsource parts of our digestive process to the fire. We still do that today, by the way. We just do it in a more fancy way, at least in some countries. Other countries, they still use the same kind of firewood, et cetera, or not countries, but, places. But with this increase of caloric intake, we grew our complex brains. Our complex brains helped us build our complex civilizations. And everything we're talking about today, everything we're doing today, having a computer, a laptop, being able to talk to each other and look at each other during a pandemic without being in the same place, all of this is as a result of, if you go all the way back to fire, because otherwise no brain, no ability to do any of this. And I think that big possibility, that idea that however big the problem is, if you take human innovation, human creativity, and you combine that with what is the technology of the day, what we can discover, the possibilities are endless.
Yeah. So since you're a futurist, what kind of technology in the future are you most excited about? Like what gets you pumped when you think about what might happen?
I think AI plus robotics. So that combination of AI and robotics. And I think there's a very selfish reason why I'm excited about it. And you can see the guys behind me. But from a human perspective, I'm very interested in our evolution with technologies as they get smarter and smarter and smarter. And one of the biggest engine for that intelligence, that artificial intelligence, is AI, of course, because AI is one of the biggest drivers to that, and some others, but that's one of the reasons why that is very interesting to me. I think there a lot of people are confused about the difference between AI and AGI, artificial general intelligence, which is when AI is actually intelligent enough to do what we can do, which of course we haven't done yet and we're nowhere close. But I think what that means, good, bad, and in between, is very interesting to me. Exciting on some levels, scary on others, but that's probably where I am very interested at the moment.
So do you see a role for AI and robotics in your contributions for the United Nations?
I do. As we look at stakeholders, the UN, of course, is the biggest forum on the planet, 193 member states, and we member states, all of us, we're all stakeholders to the UN. But how does the UN evolve with us? And the reason I think it's really interesting from a UN perspective is if we start to do this weird thing and we start to evolve with technology and we start to change, for example, one major change is that our attention span has gotten so small and it's now smaller than that of a goldfish, right? So if you look at how the UN then, how would they do their work with these stakeholders? How, for example, we're looking at this decade of action, the Sustainable Development Goals, with 10 years, and not as many anymore. I mean, the 10 years shrinking because 2020 is almost over, but you have like 10 years and you're looking out and saying, all these big goals, how can we do them? I truly believe we need the stakeholders, we need people. And I think as people get more and more powerful because they evolve with technology, so in the palm of their hands, they have this really powerful piece of equipment in a cell phone that is more powerful than the first ship that took us out of space. What can they do with this that could be helpful to what the UN is doing? And so I think that space where you make that connection is what I find most interesting from a UN perspective.
Do you feel like there's any projects in mind that the UN does that you can see AI and robotics immediately? If you had the tech immediately readily available, like what would you do with it? Like what would be the first thing you'd think of to solve a problem?
We did a few things at the UN that were really interesting, but one was counterterrorism. So I worked with CTED, the Counterterrorism Executive Directorate. They were working at the time when ISIS proliferation on social media was at its height. They were looking at how to counter those messages, those negative messages. And so from an AI perspective, that was an interesting space. Another one was working with nuclear proliferation and being able to use machine learning to teach the equipment everything that hundreds of thousands of folks had learned about nuclear proliferation, and also have the ability to be able to see through walls. For example, like if an agent was going on site to see if there was a nuclear site and maybe it was hidden underground or it was hidden behind a wall, this piece of equipment could smell and hear and see and feel things that you couldn't as a human being. So this becomes kind of the assistant in your pocket. So that's two examples of real life scenarios that we utilize this for when I was at the UN.
Wow, definitely. Thank you so much for sharing that. I love hearing all of your thoughts, and your story is just so interesting and diverse, which is so exciting. So then I have another question, like throughout your whole journey, what were the main challenges that you faced and how did you overcome them? What do you do to handle something that comes your way, like a curveball? It seems so stressful, you know? Did you have like mentors that helped you? Did you reach out to people? Like, how did you tackle them?
The first thing is with some level of calm, stop and think and kind of take stock. I think one of the things when I face a challenge is I try to come up with a scenario where I understand that it's not about me, especially when I'm in the workplace, that nobody's coming towards me, no one's trying to hurt me, that it must be good for the company in some way, shape, or form, or it must be good for the stakeholders of the role in some way, shape, or form. So one example of a big challenge that I faced was the gap between the job description and the actual job. And I think it's because I was in a lot of roles where I was brought in either as a last ditch effort, like, oh, this is not working, let's bring something different in, or it's a new thing, like Blue Cross Blue Shield, where it was a new thing and they were just given this contract and they had no idea what it was going to look like. So sometimes the definition of success is a little difficult to put your finger on.
Right.
So for example, before I was hired at Nike, there were several people before me who had failed in the role and they had been fired. And my hiring manager was kind enough to tell me, he was like, look, we've never been able to not fire the person in the role. The entire time the role has existed. So you are like person number 5 in like 3 years, and you will likely be fired too. So I mean, he's like, because we don't know what's wrong with the role. So to overcome the challenge, I said to him, look, the role may have been set up for failure, but I would like to understand why my predecessors face these challenges. And I was kind of lucky because the first week I was at Nike, they made a big mistake and did not have me set up, didn't have a computer for me, had nothing for me. So I just had an empty desk. And in the drawer of this empty desk, my predecessor had printed every email about everything they had done to her. She had all these emails back and forth with people. I guess it was her proof, like what people were saying, what people were doing, whatever. And so actually, it was like this treasure trove. I had nothing else to do because I just had an empty desk. So I just opened up the drawer and read every single email and marked it up. And I read it all from the perspective of these are her challenges, but what was supposed to be her value? What did the role stakeholder expect? Both Oregon and corporate, where Nike's based. And as I did this, I kept a direct line of communication with my hiring manager. And about a month after I was hired, I walked into his office and I said, here's my proposal to reimagine this role. Here is why I think the role needs to change. And here is what I think the change needs to look like. And the first change I wanted was I wanted to be trained in corporate versus being trained in New York City, because this person was the only person in her role in the entire country, in the entire world, really. It was just boom, that was her role. And all the pieces that she was working with were in corporate, and corporate had an issue with New York because New York was very uppity, and they thought they were cool and they thought they were better than corporate. Corporate thought, we hate working with New York. So I said up front, I need my stakeholders to be my friends, and I don't need them to look at me as the other office that thinks they're better than us. I want them to train me. I want them to say to me, this is what I'm looking for. This is what I need. So he accepted it. We restructured the role. It was very successful. And actually, that structure became the template for my US West Coast counterpart. So it worked very well.
Wow. I had no idea that there would be a gap between the job description and then the actual job. Like you had the opportunity to mold your job into something that was actually successful. That is such a cool thing to go through. How long were you there after you fixed up the position? Did you like it?
I liked it a lot, but I had a new challenge once I had fixed it. And that was that my hiring manager was fine with it, but then soon somebody else came to run New York. And that person was put above my hiring manager. And I was now asked to report to this new person. And what this new person didn't like was she felt like the role that I had created, she said it was a great role, but she wouldn't have hired me for it, if that makes sense. So what she said was, look, what we should probably do is we should hire a manager above you, and that person can take on the role you created. And then you should go back to a role that looks more like what the role was like before, which, if you remember, was a role that they couldn't keep anybody in.
See flaws in this plan.
And so at that point, I was quite open when the Advertising Research Foundation came knocking, which is when I left.
Yeah. You seem to know when is the right time to leave and what you're worth. Like, how did you know when was the right time to leave and like, when to say no? How do you know when to move on and when to find the next gig, basically?
Oh my God. So don't give me that credit, because I don't know that I knew when the right time was to leave. I think I would see the writing on the wall, but I am always looking to fix it. In this case at Nike, if I didn't get recruited out, I probably would not have left, because I thought I could fix this. I thought this was something I could fix. I was trying to get that manager to see what I thought the right thing was and how we could work together, and why this would be good for the organization. I was working on that. It was just that she was extremely abusive, actually, that manager. She'd come from fashion. She was not very Nike. You know, she cursed a lot. She screamed a lot.
Oh no.
Yeah, she was a cursor and a yeller, and she had a bad temper, and she had favorites, and I wasn't one of them. And actually, one of her favorites, I'd come into work on a weekend and I had caught stealing. At least I thought I had caught her stealing, because there was a truck outside and she was coming out boxes and boxes of shoes. And I was like,
Yeah.
and I actually went and talked to this woman, but that was one of her favorites. And that favorite actually flipped it and said, Radia is giving shoes to people in the mailroom. So it just became this kind of bizarre thing. And ultimately, actually, after I left, this favorite was caught stealing, and she'd stolen $10,000 from the corporate credit card, and she got fired. And this new woman, the boss I was talking about, she also got fired. So I guess if I'd stuck around, they would have both been gone. But I don't know if I could say I was good at knowing when to leave, because I only left because I was recruited. I probably would have kept working and trying to make it work.
Oh my God. If you could tell your past self some advice, like what would you say?
I would likely say, don't make yourself small enough to make the people around you comfortable. Because I think I spent a lot of my career trying to dull myself and be an easier pill to swallow for people around me. And I did that a lot of my career. I always was like, I shrunk in the room and let others not,
I relate so much to this.
and I don't know that would have made my life a lot easier, or, my roles a lot more successful, but I think it would have saved me a lot of pain and heartache.
Yeah, I feel like I definitely relate. As a woman, especially in tech, I often feel like the need to conform and to be taken seriously. And like when you said an easier pill to swallow, I'm like, oh, that's me, because I know I'm a lot to handle. So I'm fully aware of that. And so I definitely feel like there are many times where I do that, and I'm not sure if it's the right thing to do or not, maybe in the short term, but in the long term, will I be happy? It's very challenging.
Tell me a little bit more about that. When you say, you're a lot to handle.
But when it comes to like working in tech, in my experience, especially as someone who my job is to code on the computer for most of the day, you normally don't get people that are really loud. I recharge off of social energy. Like I'm an extrovert. And so when it comes to coding during lunch, I like to have fun. I like to get to know my friends at work. I'm not afraid to make jokes. I feel like what is a meeting without at least one joke? Like you need to have some laughter to get you through the day. And so I feel like I always have that tendency to want to speak up, especially in meetings where it's intimidating to speak up, especially a junior engineer as I am. But I feel like, why am I here if I'm not supposed to say anything or contribute anything? You shouldn't have invited me if you don't want me to say anything. So I'm also like very feminine. Like my favorite color is pink. I will deck out my desk. I stand out so much from the tech bros, and sometimes people don't want different, or they'll treat you differently because you are different. And I feel like I've often faced that challenge where I need to conform. Like I feel like if I were to be the president, I love pantsuits, but I would wear a gold ball gown. You know, like I would be that person. I would want to have myself shown on the outside in this in tech. It's very hard to balance that, but also be taken seriously. Like I want to have an input on art, design, architecture. Like I want to have it. Like I want to be able to talk about these things, have these serious conversations instead of being sidelined because I make jokes and I laugh and I'm feminine. But I can get down and dirty and talk the tech talk. I can talk shop, but those opportunities aren't always given to me because of who I am. But if I tone down the laughter, if I'm very serious, if I'm much less feminine, I'm taken more seriously sometimes.
Is that what you found, that these the things that happen is if you are too feminine or too bubbly, too much fun, make too many jokes, do you find that you're just not taken seriously, that you're sidelined? But then when you go, oh, never mind, I'll just be buttoned up, be as not feminine as I can, and maybe put on my black pantsuit, do you find that now all of a sudden they take you a little bit more seriously?
Oh, definitely. Maybe it's the line between casual and professional when it comes to being yourself. And I feel like tech, it pushes that line because you wear t-shirts to work instead of a tie. You really push the line of like, radical candor, something often pushed in tech workplaces. But like, would you ever have radical candor at like your buttoned up law firm? Like probably not to the same degree. So it's definitely pushing that boundary. But then if you don't conform, I feel like there's a lot of uniform like culture throughout a lot of tech that you can face that you have to kind of, if you're too different, you're not taken seriously. Like I have worked, so through my internships, I worked at 5 different companies, and I've noticed in some internships and some places I've worked at, like I've had friends that were basically minorities, any minority, like LGBTQ or person of color, gender nonconforming. I feel like those have all been reasons to not take them as seriously or give them bigger projects compared to those that are the more standard expectation. The male, I've coded, I've coded my whole life. This is what I do in my free time. And I feel like if I don't code in my free time, it doesn't mean that I don't like coding at work, you know? It doesn't mean I don't know what I'm talking about. But like those different cultures, and they don't necessarily mesh instantly. You know, it takes effort to have that diverse workplace that takes everyone in. And I'm thankful to have opportunities. I worked at Disney, which has been, I love it because I can be unapologetically myself and I will still get the engineering experience and mentorship and attention that I want and I'm able to contribute to. But I've also worked at other companies that are much more, like biotech, for example, is much more academic, much more focused on not necessarily the culture or diversity, but what you're contributing to. That's the main mission here, is how can we make that better? And that sometimes it can get lost in who you hire and how you hire them, and who you hire and how you hire them affects who's different and how do you treat them different. There's always that implicit bias that's it's always there. And I feel like that's why I love my major in cognitive sciences. You really learn like the group think. We all have it. You just have to fight it. You know?
So given all this experience that you've had, how does this impact the way you're going to approach the workplace?
That's something I've often battled with, because I what you said about being a tough pill to swallow, I'm like, that's definitely me. And I don't want to sacrifice potential career opportunities because of who I am. But I've also had the opportunity to work at a couple places where I interview as unapologetically myself, and I am myself the whole time. And at Disney, it really worked out for me. Like I had like such a community at my workplace, and I was just me the whole time, and I loved it. And I want that for my future jobs. Like I want to be able to be myself. So as I'm job hunting now and interviewing now and everything, I feel like that is something I've been leaning towards. But it's also like I'm interested in the human rights field as well, and that more like law space, which isn't exactly where I feel like I could be unapologetically right. It's much more formal there, you know? So I don't know, honestly. I'm still figuring it out, but that's what I'm like I resonate so much with what you said. So it's a struggle for sure.
And I know exactly how you feel, because I grew up in law. And I think there is an advantage to knowing how to be buttoned up, to
Right.
knowing how to dress up. Because when you are hired, you're hired to fill a role. And as somebody with an actress background, is there really a big difference between the role you play on the stage and the role you play at your job? I think the reason it emerged as a word, and I love words, but I think the reason it emerged as a word, the reason those two words are exactly the same is because there are similarities to that. So I do think that I gained a lot by learning the role that I am supposed to play. I think it doesn't have to be at odds with who you are as a person,
Right.
especially as when you leave your job. It doesn't mean that you should make yourself so small that you're uncomfortable. I think if the role you play makes who you are uncomfortable, I think that's when you need to re-examine it. But I think that sometimes we take it too far. And I know a lot of people hate when I say that, but I think sometimes we take it too far and we think that we have to go crazy at work. Like I hate it when people curse all the time at work. I hate
That
it.
happened to you?
I hate it. I do not like, and I find that happens in tech a lot. I do not like this bro mentality of coming up with every single curse word you can think of and throwing it at me throughout every conversation as if you did not learn how to speak. To me, that is not knowing your words. And I
Yeah.
think part of it also comes from the legal part where we were very comfortable with words. So we knew how to express ourselves. And I think you should challenge yourself to express yourself if the only way you can express yourself is by using the F word and the S word and all that stuff. That doesn't say anything. That doesn't communicate. So I do believe that there are times when you should comport yourself because if that's the only way you can feel comfortable, then I don't think that's appropriate. I think
Definitely.
the goal is for as many of us to be as comfortable as possible, which means perhaps none of us is going to be completely comfortable. If you are completely comfortable doing something that makes me very uncomfortable, then maybe you should tone yours down a little bit. And I'll try to raise my tolerance up a little bit so we can meet somewhere in the middle. So I completely understand that in some spaces, you've got to play a role, right?
Right.
But at the same time, as I said, if I were talking to my younger self, I wouldn't say to this self, "Oh, make yourself as small as possible. Feel very uncomfortable. Feel like you're not going in the right direction. Keep taking steps back, and you'll be okay." Kind of like what you're saying is not being yourself, not being feminine, because you're afraid that you will be treated as if you didn't know what you were talking about, or having to say, "Yeah, I code at home," or even worse, having to go home and code. So you're one of those guys who goes home every night.
It's definitely a thing.
Like, I can't do anything I love anymore. I must code 24/7.
Oh my gosh. Yes. That definitely feels like the type we look for. But yeah, no, it's definitely in that environment where I mean I haven't worked in an environment where they swear all the time, but did you ever feel pressured to also swear to like blend into that culture? Oh good.
Yeah.
Okay.
I have made myself small in the past, but what I will never do is something that goes against my core. If I'm that uncomfortable with it, I don't do it. Actually, I try to model the behavior that I feel comfortable around. I'm not particularly sensitive. It's not that it bothers me that much. I just think that it creates an insensitive environment. And I feel like, especially when you're in that bro culture, and I deal with that a lot. A lot of times I'm the only woman in the room, especially when you're in that culture, I feel like sometimes it's an at you culture. So you feel like these are coming at you and they're speaking the way they would speak without you in the room, because in essence, you're intruding, and I think
I just
that
like shivered.
kind of, kind of the feeling that comes across. And that's why I don't assimilate. Because in assimilating, someone really, really intelligent said this to me once. And, that you come in and you're a completely different animal and you wear your penguin suit so that you can assimilate with the penguins. And the entire point of maybe bringing in a rabbit into the room is so that you can see the point of view of a rabbit. And if the rabbit has to become a penguin to work in the company, then you have huge mistakes, like what happened to, was it Louis Vuitton, that had that racially insensitive piece at their stores, as if not one person in the organization, could have looked at it and gone, "Hey, wait a minute, that kind of looks like dot, dot, dot." that didn't happen because probably that person was too busy wearing their penguin suit and couldn't be helpful in the room. And I think the entire point, and I always have this conversation around diversity. When I was at Heidrick and Struggles, we had companies who would come to us and say, my woman board member is retiring, so I need you to go off and find me a woman board member. And the only time they were looking for that woman board member is when that one was retiring. And ultimately, if you're always looking for the best slate of candidates, you don't have to worry that your woman board member is retiring, because maybe you'd have a few women.
Right.
And I feel like usually when they bring in that person is meant to assimilate to an overall culture, as opposed to that person being something to help them evolve, help them grow, help them see what else is going on so they can be a better organization. I think a lot of these diversity conversations will devolve into, it is a good thing to do for the not so fortunate members of our society. But it's not about doing a great thing for me. It's about increasing your ability to be more relevant. It's about increasing the spaces that you can penetrate into, because you have an understanding of how the spaces are evolving. You have an understanding of the kinds of people that are in it, of the expectations, in essence, of your stakeholders. If you sell dresses, you want to have a sense of your stakeholders and how they're evolving, as opposed to maybe, I've done this since the 50s, and by golly, I will keep doing it until the end of time, exactly like I did in the 50s.
Oh my gosh. Yeah, that's so interesting to say, because there is literally no downside to having properly like implemented diversity. There's like nothing wrong with it. All you're doing is expanding your market, your target market, like what your people need, like representing the voices that are out there and are like people who are listening and want to be heard. There's literally no downside. And so whenever we were like that, for like when the woman at the table retires, who will replace her? I'm like, how about more than half of them? Let's have more. Let's make it representative.
Yes. Let's not just say, okay, good, we filled that woman role. Let's move on. Now we have board members, please.
Right? We are not tokens. We are the population.
Right.
For half the population, people of color, we're more than half of the population. Right. We're actually not minorities, we're the majority, but whatever you want to call it.
Whatever you want to call us.
But I always love that it's called minorities. I'm like, we're not a minority.
Right. Well, my favorite is that even women are minorities.
Yeah, I never got that.
Quite often women get pulled right into minority. It's like, that is actually not what we are.
Right?
We're a lot of things, but we're not minorities.
I know. I needed a petition to change that to the majority. The white man is the minority, really. Like, you really think about it. Speaking of all of this, how do you think like race, gender, and identity has like affected the challenges you face in the workplace? Like, have you ever had to deal with that?
Oh no, never.
Oh my gosh, what a world! We fixed it. I'm so glad.
No, I'm kidding. I think race and gender, at least for me, has increased isolation and reduced resources. I think across the board, it's just you're more isolated and you tend to have less resources at your disposal. Even if you start out in the quote unquote same place in life, and I don't even know what that means. I don't know how it's possible to start out in the same place in life. When I was much younger, when I was at places like Heidrick and Struggles and beginning to think about this thing more and more, I believe that at least from a gender perspective, the absence of a boys' club for women was at least partially to blame. And that's why I was pushing so hard to create kind of a girls' club. But as I get older and I start to look at things like ex-human and this concept of co-evolving with machines and looking at kind of a next generation of people who have evolved with these intelligent machines, I'm beginning to think that it is very possible that more and more will be in this new mode of being. This concept of a gender neutral economy, an economy that is less, that the interdependencies that come from race, from gender, some of the interdependencies with gender had to do with our physical strength, with our height. If you think about it, as we went into the workplace initially, especially with the starting of factories, We were not tall enough to get to the top of whatever the equipment was to turn it on or to pull it down or whatever. And we weren't strong enough to pick up some of these things. And so it fell to the men to do that. And more, the women, they kind of created this new place for women. That wasn't the case in the past, which is, kind of go home and take care of all of that domestic bliss so that when he's done working, there'll be dinner, that kind of good stuff. But you wonder, is it possible to go into almost a post-gender world just because when you get into this bio-machine nature of the fourth industrial revolution and you start looking at, there's less and less of an advantage to being stronger, to being taller, to being able to withstand more physically. So that now, I can pick up a computer, computers aren't even as big as they used to be, right? Where it was this whole, thing that you had to pick up or don't leave right there, or it was in the entire room. Now to pick up my computer, it's a little laptop. I'm as capable of pressing the button as any male. So it really now comes down to not just your IQ, but even your EQ. What can you do? What relationships can you have with the machine? Some of the bigger, more intense, more repetitive, sometimes even more, in a sense, physically difficult work can be pushed over to the machine, or you can bring in these machine partners. And then, now the humans are doing what humans do better, be more creative, turn on a dime, that sort of thing. And more, I wonder, will it be that bio machine relationship, our relationships with machines, not our relationship with one another, not our gender? Will that define our work more, where you can make more, if you go back to profit, for example, where you can have more profit, you can have a stronger, a better organization if you can come up with the best machine human mix, as opposed to the best male female or the best racial mix. I think so. I think it could really go into kind of this I hate saying post-racial or post-gender. I don't think there's ever really quite a thing, but I think at least from the perspective of work and all of that, that may be more of a symptom, and the cause may be how we're raised. That's something much bigger to deal with. But if we stick to something really small that doesn't feel so small, which is work, does that change the work we're being prepared for, the things that we can do? Does that change that relationship going forward? So I think of it more from that perspective now.
Thank you so much for sharing that. My next question is kind of more the future oriented. What are you working on next in tech? Like, what are you excited to contribute to next? What's your next big thing?
Actually, I'm really excited about my next project. So yes, love to talk about that. My next project is really interesting because I've decided to combine two loves of mine, in a manner of speaking. I'd mentioned earlier that I was writing about the ancients in my novel writing.
Yeah.
And I've decided to combine that with kind of the futurism work in my theory work. And I'm looking to do a study of the coevolution of humans and machines in ancient civilizations. And I think that would be a really interesting comparative analysis, foundational work for modern times. Like if you look at it, and if I could take like 5,000 years of ancient civilizations and what our coevolution with machines looked like then, back before the machines were smart, and then maybe do a comparative analysis with as the machines became smart in modern times, and what that coevolution looks like, rate and depth and, scale, etc. I think that'd be very interesting. So that's what I'm working on next.
That's so exciting. That's very different. I've never thought of something like that before. It's so exciting. So when you do your research, is it through like your own free time, or is it through your organization, or like how can someone follow up and see what the progress is on that?
It's my organization and me. So it's a combo. Usually I'll come up with an idea. I get support from my organization, maybe put together teams when necessary. I also work in a lot of ecosystems. So I've got Stanford University is an ecosystem, Singularity University is an ecosystem, MIT is an ecosystem, Harvard Business is an ecosystem. So of course the UN, World Economic Forum. So usually I pull in all those ecosystems to start to look at pieces. And actually with Harvard, I just spoke with some of the departments that deal with the ancients. So, spaces like that. And then the Metropolitan Museum, I'm a New Yorker. So the Metropolitan Museum is a great ecosystem that I've worked with in the past. So pretty much that's kind of how the work is done. And then often as you kind of get to that place, we would publish something in a journal or that sort of thing as you come up with whatever that study reveals.
Wow, awesome. So for women who are interested in pursuing roles similar to what you're currently up to, what advice would you give them? How would you suggest they start out? Asking for a friend?
Oh my God. I don't have a clue. Okay. My journey is so bizarre. I don't know how you get here, but I've seen some younger people in the space who are in a different world than I was in. You know, there are organizations, schools that prefer future studies degrees, for example. And also there are organizations like Singularity University where you can go and do a 6-week stint where they kind of get you integrated in the space. One of the ways I've seen young people get involved that I really like, that I think is super interesting, is through challenges. So Singularity University has different challenges, and it's very similar. The gentleman who developed those challenges used to work at the UN, and what he's done is he's developed kind of UN-esque, almost like SDGs challenges that they will say, okay, you know, this big challenge on water, this big challenge on energy, and young people around the world come in and they say, this is how I would solve this problem. And so they get absorbed into these ecosystems that way. A very good friend of mine has a group of challenges called Gifted Citizen, and he does that across South America. He's based in Mexico. So he does that across South America, and they also do challenges like that. That one's a lot broader. It's really about, can it impact, I think it's 10 million people or something like that. And so it's that space. And then he is integrated with Pitchet Palace, which is in England, and it's one of Queen Elizabeth's sons. I think it's Duke of York. And he has all these winners come to his palace and they do a 1-week kind of stint on the challenge that they did. So I find that a lot of young people who are interested to get to where I am now tend to go through either education, like things like future studies, like I said, or through these sorts of challenges. I find that that's a good space to immediately get in.
Wow, thank you for sharing that. And then another advice question. Do you have any messages for the young women in tech, or maybe even not so young women in tech, in companies and academic organizations that you'd like to share?
Sure. I'm going to say something that maybe people will say, well, but I think the first thing is, don't let the word tech scare you. I think a lot of people hear tech and they think of that bro culture and they think, I don't want any of that. But that's not all it is. You don't need to partake, and you don't need to conform either. I think there's a lot of room for being feminine. I think there's a lot of room for what you are passionate about in tech. I always like to remind people that fire and writing were as prolific a technology in their day as is robots and artificial intelligence today. So I would say, in short, if necessity is the mother of invention, I would say invention is the father of technology. So it is okay to be creative. It's okay to have fun. It's okay to take your curiosity, take your passion, bring them into technology, because really technology started out as us needing tools, right? We needed something to do the thing we wanted to create. Like, we'd like to break that rock up into something that'll cover up the door of our home. And so we come up with a tool, and maybe initially it was kind of like a hammer, and now it's like a jackhammer. It's like, you know, but we created all of these things to help us do things that were more important. So let's not get hung up on the technology itself and see that as something that prevents us from participating.
Definitely. Thank you so much for sharing. I feel like definitely relate to tech being intimidating, and embracing the possibilities is by far the most freeing thing about tech. That was my last question.
Let's wrap up with one more question for
Yeah.
you. So I've given my advice, but you're looking from a very different perspective. And not just because you're young, but because you are in this fourth industrial revolution at a time when some of us aren't, right? I wasn't in university during the fourth industrial revolution, but you have been, and you're looking at some of the future challenges as well as the possibilities and the excitement. So what kind of advice would you give to a friend of yours, people your age, people who are a little older than you, people who are a little younger than you? What would you say?
I learned how to code in college, so I had no idea. I mean, like, I had a MySpace profile and I would always be the person that was like pimping out the profiles. I didn't know I was coding in HTML, but I just wanted to make my profile look cute. And I didn't even know like that was coding. So it was all very new to me. And when I took my first CS class at Berkeley, computer science at Berkeley is very competitive. And there's some of us that don't know how to code, but a lot of people have like an idea at least, or like know something about a computer. For me, it was completely abstracted away. I had like no idea. And so it was very intimidating for sure. And then when I started, like I honestly, I don't think I was very good at it. I thought I was terrible at it, but like I understood the concepts that like the professors were teaching. I could talk about it. But when I was working on the projects, I would get stumped. And I learned, because I stuck with it, I realized I just needed practice with debugging. I needed practice with these skills that you just can't learn instantly. And I've seen so many people just drop out of CS classes and drop out of tech because of that. Honestly, classes are great to get exposure to, but nothing will teach you the way you will with like an apprenticeship type of situation, like a software engineering internship. Learning how to debug is not something that I've learned in my classes. Computer science is not the same as software engineering, first off. And so like in computer science, they don't teach you the basics of debugging, and debugging is different, whatever you're doing. And learning how to problem solve and like what this error message means, or maybe if you're coding in JavaScript, you're like, well, where is the error message? Give me your real error message here. And through that process, and I feel like it's so easy just to like lose motivation and faith in yourself. It's so easy just to be like, this is so hard and I'm putting all of my hours into it. Like I felt like I put more hours into my CS classes than most of my classmates did, and I felt like I was so far behind. And then I realized I'm at a really competitive university, and when I talked to my friends, they were like, no, we're just faking it, we're also putting in all like everyone is struggling too in their own way. And like I would say just like, don't let yourself give up. And while it is intimidating, if you enjoy that moment when it all works and it's all worth it, keep going. Keep having faith in yourself, because now that I've finished quite a few software engineering internships at this point, and so I feel now when I go into CS classes, I have this whole new confidence. I have this whole new ability where I know how to debug, I know how to code, and starting a project from scratch doesn't scare me anymore. that used to scare me. And so if you have faith, you do get better over time. You do learn, and sometimes some people don't have the advantage of getting introduced to what tech is and what coding is at a younger age, where you have that mentorship with that community. A lot of my close friends, they were in robotics in high school or middle school. And I tried to join the robotics club, but I was the only girl and they were kind of mean to me. They were like, you can come to our competitions, but you're better for our optics. And I'm like, I'm not going to come. So like, there's some things that people have exposure to that the rest of us don't, and we're all different, and that doesn't make us any less valuable, doesn't make us any less meaningful, doesn't make our contributions any less huge. Like we are all significant in our own ways from our own lived experiences, and it's so easy to lose sight of that confidence and that faith in yourself.
That's very well said. Really, really well said. I think that's great advice.
It was by far the biggest challenge for me going through classes and software engineering internships. So for me, like I took time off of college to do like year-round software engineering internships, and that helped me so much. I feel like because 3 months at a company is enough for you to get kind of comfortable, but like a year is enough time for you to really learn and get mentorships that are really meaningful and learn so much about yourself and how you can code. And you're not getting like an A or a B or a C grade, like no one cares about the grade. They just want you to improve. Like it helps, like it helps, that company if you can do well at coding too. No one wants you to fail there. I highly recommend just throwing yourself out there and try your best to be fearless. That's my message.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for taking this time to hang out with me. This has been so fun, and I am so psyched to share this with my friends and share like your amazing lessons and experiences with everybody. So thank you so much.
Thank you. You're a very impressive young lady. I really enjoyed this conversation. Let's keep in touch. This was great.